All right, so we're back for round 2 on shaping the pattern that we had cut out in the last video. If you guys missed it, I showed you how to make a paper pattern for this front right fender. We've got the metal cut, and now it's time to start shrinking and stretching and wheeling and kind of massage that template that we've made into shape. Today we're going to start off with introducing some blows into the midsection of this panel and then shrinking to bring the upper and lower lips in. So what I'm doing now, I'm just laying out the general area where I want to introduce some stretch or some blows. And if you remember, I said on the last video, this area back here really didn't need a lot of shape. So I'm going to minimize what I'm doing. I'm going to keep it back away from that edge. But I know I need crown through here. And what the hammer does is it's kind of a quick way to introduce a lot of crown. Some people would do this all on the English wheel, and for the sake of time, I just found that using this leather bag with lead birdshot in it and a bossing mallet does the job quickly. So let's see here. I'm going to try to keep these uniform as I work my way through. I'm going to lighten up at the ends because I don't want a big ridge to show up. I want it to kind of feather out nicely, so I soften the blows out at the outside. Okay. The next thing I will do is just add some shape out here. You can see this is starting to ripple. That's how we know it's going to need to be shrunk. We'll add some shape up here as well. Open it back up just a little bit. And there, and we can see there needs to be a bunch of shrinking done through here and down here, and that's going to bring it back into where we need it to be. But now we're getting a pretty good fit through here. You can feel the rib. So we've put our initial stretch into the midsection of this panel here by hammering it over the shot bag with the lead birdshot in it. And now I'm just kind of roughly seeing what needs to happen. And what I see is we need to bring this thing down in a lot of places. But what happens is when I start to shrink this right through the center portion here, it folds both ends down. So the key to doing this without going too far is to just shrink a little bit at a time and refit. I like to take a lot of trips back and forth from the tools to the buck to do my fitment testing. Something you hear often is that these aluminum bodies were hammered over a buck. In most cases, the hammer work is done on the tooling and it's fit to the buck. Although you will see on some of the older bucks and some newer ones, there's reinforcement around the grill areas, headlight areas, things like that, where people are actually hammering on the buck. This buck is designed to fit the panels too. So do my shaping on the tooling, bring it over, fit to the buck. So we've put a good amount of crown in here, and now what I'm going to do is just bring down this midsection through here just a little bit. I kind of ease my way into the shaping here so I can see from here to here I'm going to start my shrinking. And I'm going to bring the shrinker right up to where I have this kind of edge with the stretching, the hammering, and start there. So as I explained earlier, the reciprocating hammer has these thumbnail shrinking dies. They are made of Delrin. Delrin is a very hard plastic, and I use the Delrin on the aluminum material because it doesn't mar it up. Steel dies will leave a lot of marks in the aluminum, and it takes a lot of effort to clean those up, especially on a raw aluminum finish like we're going to have on this car. So we'll turn on the old sewing machine. I like to start at the center of the area to be stretched or shrunk and work my way side to side. On my passes, I'm just kind of lining up and stacking each of the passes right alongside of each other. As you use these tools, you learn what you need and what you don't. Some people take a much more scientific approach and they lay out an entire grid. They have specific numbers and lines that they follow, but I shape by eye. I don't really shape by number. I think there's a balance in between both. Now I'm going to make more strokes, but I'm not going to go as deep, so I can curl that edge over. You'll see it start to come down. You can see I'm starting to get a full continuous radius from where I blew out the middle with the hammer, bossing mallet, to where I'm starting to pull this down and over. What I mean by the full radius, you see it's starting to take shape that way. So there, now this is lower and this is lower than where it was before. Still have a ways to go though. So I'm going to pop this open, just with my knee here. Kind of open it up a little. See where else it needs to come in. So I can come all the way up into here. So I'll mark it like that. Kind of gives me an idea of where to transition to feather it into the existing shrinking. I'll hit this area here. Okay, I'm going to hit this. This is a high spot here. It just kind of tells you where it wants to pucker like that, stick up. I'm going to shrink that down. Before I go any further up here, I'm going to grab this bottom edge and bring it in as well, just to kind of keep it in balance. So as I am going back and forth, shaping and fitting, I can see from underneath the panels really starting to come into good contact with the buck through here, but then it lifts off right in this section. So I'm going to have to come in and shrink a lot deeper to pull that down. This again is one of those things that I like to ease into, because if I were to shrink too far right away, the panel will get, way too much crown in it. It's lifted way off the buck. And then with the tooling that I have, it's hard to come back in and peel it back open. In a lot of cases, I can do it sometimes by hammering, and I figured out another way to open a panel back up using this, but it can be really, really difficult, and sometimes you have to remake the whole panel. So that's why I like to ease my way into it. All right, the panel is now really close to the buck. It's within, I would say, about a ½ an inch at the highest points where it's just kind of peeling off up here and down here. So now what I'll do, I'll take it to the wheel and start to smooth my work out. I've got a little bit of what I call shouldering right here, and I don't like that. That's something that needs to be addressed right away. It's just where the hammer portion that I did with the bossing mallet meets the shrinker, and it created this sharp edge. So I want that to all flow nice and smooth. So I'm going to take the hammer and just knock this up a little bit just to smooth that out, to kind of get it to flow nicely. Okay, so I've got the panel kind of locked in this hard radius right now, but I'm going to open it up to wheel, and that will help with the sides of the anvil hitting throughout my radius. And initially, I'm just going to wheel to try to get the kind of the roughness out, to kind of planish it. And then I'll move into a forming technique of wheeling. So right now I'm just kind of knocking all the highs down and leveling things out. You can see how lumpy it is. As I go through this process, it'll get smoother and smoother as things balance out. And watching a panel wiggle and move through the wheel like this is a little bit nerve-wracking. If you've done this a while, you know that if a panel's going through the English wheel and it's whipping back and forth, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a very nice finish. But in this case, I'm knocking down all of the hammer marks, so it's inevitable that it's going to have that movement. As I get to the end finish on the panel, though, this movement should be just nice and fluid and very smooth. And I'm wheeling out past my work area so that it'll slowly kind of feather in the entire shape as a whole. Another way to do this, if you have someone else you're working with on the English wheel, is to hold the panel in shape. So exactly how it'll fit to the buck, and keep it locked in that shape as you're wheeling it back and forth. And that is a way with a couple people that you can achieve the shape pretty quickly as well. Now, as it's starting to smooth out, one common question that people ask, or a struggle that people deal with when they're wheeling, is the wheeling marks, which like the ribs from the anvils, and your stop points. You'll have dimples here, or you'll have kind of creases on the panel. And what I found is my stop points, if I'm wheeling alone and I can't wheel all the way through a panel and have my stop points out at the ends, I'll make my stop points at a high crown area, because the high crown areas are much easier when finishing in polished aluminum to sand out, to make disappear, and clean up. These stop points are at kind of a vulnerable area, and it'll take a lot of finishing out here to clean those up. But here I'm stopping at a high crown area. Actually, this will get trimmed off anyways. But it's something, there's so many different elements that you have to keep in mind as you're doing this that ultimately make less work in the end and a better finish. And I'm just starting to get this figured out. It's been 11 years, and I would say well over 20,000 hours. Probably closer to 35,000 hours that I've practiced. And I'm still practicing. So now I'm going to swap ends here and do the same thing, working it out the other direction. You can see it's starting to flow more and more smoothly. It's amazing. A lot of times the panel will work harden when it gets to this point, but it's still very pliable, very soft. So we're getting pretty close now. Yeah, very, very close. It's almost there without even having to do a whole lot. Just probably some tweaking over my knee, and the panel's just about where it needs to be at. So as I look up inside here, I can see my buck starts to travel inward about 8 inches back on the panel. So I'll put this up in the reciprocating hammer and shrink this in and draw that nose down in. Now, a lot of this will get cut off, but I like to have, as much as I can, every part of the template or the pattern that I have up here dead on where it needs to be. So it just makes the next piece go that much more smoothly. So now I've got the nose of this panel flowing into the nose of the car, and it's looking really good against the buck underneath. We'll get a couple shots of that. So what I like to do is get the panel to where, you know, I can kind of just hold it and I don't have to put a whole bunch of clamps on it to have it take shape. Right now, obviously this can come in, which is just going to be a little bit of hand tweaking. Should be able to get that tucked in at the back here and brought under a whole bit. But it's really close. So for initial fitment, this is right where I want it to be. And now what I would normally do is I'll get back on the English wheel and just do a real light covering over the whole thing just to soften up any sharp spots, but it's feeling pretty good for a start here. And then I will trim out this fender well, and then I will move on to the next part of the panel, which would be this inner portion. Hope that was insightful, and this is part 2 of this process. Now, we're going to try to document as much of this build as we can, so tune back in if you guys have questions, comments, let us know, and I'll do my best to answer them.